Assalamu alaikum and welcome to the Islamic Pulse Talk Show. We are embarking upon a series on womanhood. Assalamu alaikum and welcome to the Islamic Pulse Talk Show. We are here in the studio embarking upon a series on womanhood and woman's identity. And in this first episode, inshallah, we're going to be talking about whether men should even be talking about womanhood in general. In order to talk about this subject a little bit and to join us in the overall series, we have Sayyid Agha Ali Raza. Sayyid Agha Ali Raza, assalamu alaikum. Welcome to the Islamic Pulse Talk Show.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullah. Thank you for having me here.
Jazakallah. So Sayyid, one of the things that we thought was really interesting to tackle, but we're going to have to do a couple of episodes on it because it's such a vast discussion and it has so many different variables, is this concept of womanhood and a woman's identity, or the essential nature of a woman in the overall existence of the cosmos, inshallah. And in this first episode, we wanted to talk about this idea, or this kind of a statement that is made that, well, perhaps men should not be even talking about women's issues or women's matters or the essence of a woman as is. So inshallah, in the name of Allah, to begin the series and to talk a little bit about this, we hand it over to you in the name of Allah.
So as you said, one of the talking points that comes up when you go through and have a review of feminist literature in our times is that men should not be leading the debate or the discussion about issues related to women.
Yes.
And this is something that comes up especially in social media, in popular culture, not so much in academia, but in places and spaces where people are more engaged with intellectual topics in the general level of society.
Sure.
So the first thing that we might want to discuss is how prevalent such a standpoint is. This entire idea of a radical feminist coming up to you and saying, just remain silent, because you're a man, you're not allowed to talk about women's issues. And in turn, because we know that throughout history, especially in the Abrahamic faiths, the leaders of the Abrahamic faiths were normally men.
Sure.
So there is this counter narrative against religion that comes up, that religion is a patriarchal enterprise and religious leaders are normally men, and therefore they should not be talking about women's issues. And even within Muslim circles, for instance, you have this current of feminist Islam.
Sure.
Of new feminist thinkers who want to reinterpret Islamic doctrines, Islamic thought, Islamic teachings in a more feminist limelight.
And the feminism that is promoted by the West is what we're
the
talking
feminist,
about, with the baggage that comes with it.
Exactly.
Which will open up, inshallah, in the series in the long run.
Absolutely, because that is how we want to form the discussion. It is basically a conversation between pure Muhammadan Islam and modern feminism, with all of its good and bad attributes that might follow. So the first thing that we want to discuss is how prevalent is this view? Are truly all feminists so averse towards any form of male intervention into women's issues? A review of the literature and a review of all of the material that is available to us leads us to see that there are at least 3 points that we can highlight here. Number one, there is a significantly influential minority that sticks to this point. And their narrative is this, that men should either not express any opinions or at least not lead the discourse when it comes to women's issues.
Sure.
So these are just two flavors. One of them is more radical, the other is a bit toned down, but it still has that anti-masculine flavor to it, right? It is a minority within the larger academic body of feminism, but it is an influential and a vocal minority. So, and people who are involved in this kind of a standpoint are people pertaining to radical feminism, or people pertaining to the idea of standpoint theory, which is an epistemic standpoint, which inshallah we'll discuss that later on as well. It is an epistemic standpoint which says that only women can truly experience and understand what women are going through. So these are the kinds of people who would argue in favor of men shutting up. Right? The other thing that is important to note here when we're talking about the prevalence of this standpoint is the fact that when it comes to highly personal or emotionally charged issues, like gender-based abuse, for example, it is in such issues that you find that the resistance from feminism is very strong, because they see themselves as victims, and for a large part of Western history at least, they have been victims. Women in general, not just feminists, have been victims. So there is this sense of not allowing men to dictate how, or to form the narrative of how women's issues should be explained and deliberated upon, especially in these emotionally charged issues. As I said, like, for example, gender-based abuse, the right to having children or not, etc. And the third point here to appreciate is that if you go on to social media platforms, you'll find this talking point everywhere. So you'll seldom come across a video where men are not being hammered down, are not being told to completely shut up, right?
When it comes to women's matters.
When it comes to women's issues. And the reason behind that is this disproportionate majority of social media being of this form is that there is a dichotomy, there is a break between academic feminism and activist feminism. So when it comes to activism spaces, when it comes to social media, when it comes to popular expression, platforms of popular expression, there that influential minority is more vocal than a more passive feminist writer who's just writing his books and going to the university and having lectures, etc. So they are more limited in their specialized academic circles, whereas popular media, popular culture is more inundated with radical stances against masculinity.
It's really interesting, Sayyid, before we continue with the discussion, but it's like, I don't know, sometimes there's very inherently these things are kind of flawed, you know what I mean? These statements that they make that because they're not women, they shouldn't be talking about women's issues. They kind of, immediately, you start to think about, does this, because they're trying to make kind of like an absolute general rule, that because you're not of the gender, or because you're not like me, in whatever capacity, then you don't have the right to talk about me or tell me who I am, et cetera, et cetera. But if you take it and you kind of extrapolate, or you take this and put this in other places, it's like, well, okay, the adult should not be talking about the child should not be talking about the adult, the woman shouldn't be talking about the man shouldn't be talking about the woman, and then you just keep on going through all the rights, The Orientalists should not be talking about the Eastern lands, for example, who they consider themselves to be the experts on the East, and vice versa. It's almost like a big hodgepodge of confusion that will become created, So, and the one example that, the adult should not be talking about the child because he's not currently a child. Maybe he was a child 20, 30, 40 years ago. You're not experiencing what the child is experiencing. To me, it kind of throws everything out of whack. So how do you nurture a child? How do you educate a child? Because you see what I'm saying? So Absolutely. It's almost like the statement itself is so inherently flawed that it will create chaos across the spectrum.
Absolutely. So if I were to take that idea that you've presented and if we were to pursue its logical conclusions, where it leads us, if we were to walk the yellow brick road, we would find that it would basically lead to a total breakdown of conversation. Men can no longer talk to women, women can no longer talk to men, Muslims can no longer talk to Christians, Christians can no longer talk to Muslims, people from the East can no longer talk to the West, and then the generational divide. So everything becomes absolutely subjective, absolutely personal.
And you're creating walls and barriers.
And these are infinitely increasing walls and barriers, because when it comes to subjective experience, then the only place it truly stops is with the individual. So even though both of us are scholars at the Hausa, my individual experience subjectively is different from yours. Now, if this became a source and a cause for me to argue that you can no longer understand my experience and relate to it and understand it and analyze it and vice versa, then each person would be a totally isolated island. And therefore, what would that lead to? There would no longer be general principles to many of our discussions, which in turn would be the end of science and knowledge as we know, because science and knowledge, in the end of the day, are a collection of general principles about a certain subject.
Reality in general would be shattered.
Absolutely.
There is no one reality.
So, but we need to circle around and take a nuanced approach to how feminists deal with this topic. So I would like to present like 3 basic introductory points before we actually go on to the arguments that they make when they say that men shouldn't be talking about women's issues. And these 3 introductory points are more of a kind of a disclaimer, so that our audience understands what mindset we're taking to this discussion. The first point is that we as the people analyzing this phenomena need to be objective in our analysis. So we need to make an unprejudiced, unbiased analysis of what feminist thinkers are articulating and where they're coming from, what the history behind that is, what are the particular circumstances of Western culture and civilization that has led them to these stances, and what are more manipulative or malicious intents that might also be involved. So what that does is, if you're objective in your analysis, what that does is, it leads you out of the binary trap. It leads you out of the fact that you're kind of looking at things as an us against them kind of an analysis, a white and black kind of analysis, because there's a lot of gray area going on, right? But at the same time, being objective does not mean that you suddenly become totally naive and you ignore the undercurrent within world culture, world society, and especially within Western civilization, modern Western civilization. Throughout history, you have had these cabals, you have had these groups, interest groups, who have tried to manipulate the overall movement of humanity, its cultural and intellectual movement. And they've tried to do this, like they've tried to curate what's going on in order to facilitate their own objectives, right? Which have nothing to do with academic debates or intellectual debates. These are very power politics, power, wealth, domination, right? In modern times, we appreciate and we are totally aware of the fact that the phenomena of Zionism, in all of its forms, right, is the primary undercurrent that is pervasive and dominates not only politics in the West, but its academia, its media, its entertainment, its popular culture, and tries to hijack everything that's going on and tries to manage everything that is going on in order to serve its own objectives. Right? A very simple example of this, and obviously we also realize that there is resistance to this undercurrent as well, because human phenomena is not a robotic phenomena. It's very organic. If there's tyranny, there's oppression, there's manipulation, there's coercion, there will also be resistance. Now, maybe the magnitude would be different. One might be more dominant in society, the other might be more passive, etc. These can change, but human society needs to be seen as an organic phenomenon. Right? So when we're talking about feminists, when we're talking about the larger feminist movement, number one, it would be wrong just to label it as some satanic movement, created and perpetuated by
Satan
agents
worshippers.
of Satan and Baphomet worshippers. Right? So, and I'm actually quoting people from the West.
Yeah,
You have
yeah.
these radical hardliners in the West. I'm quoting
Yeah.
them. We in
Baphomet
Islam, in the Hausa, we do not take such standpoints seriously. These are over-politicized standpoints. Right? This is one. Number two, we realize that even though it is a philosophical, cultural, academic, intellectual endeavor,
Yeah.
which in its core wants to seek out truths and correct wrongdoings that have been in the past, in its core it wants to be objective, like any academic movement.
Sure.
But at the same time, the very fabric of society is such that it too is not immune from manipulation.
Yeah.
So we as outside viewers, as representatives of the Hausa, for example, in our own capacity, have to take everything that is going on with a pinch of salt.
Yeah.
So we're neither going to the extreme of calling it an absolute evil, neither are we going to the extreme of becoming totally naive and saying that everything that's going on is pure and scientific and academic and
there's no flaws or something.
an example of this, before we go on to the actual arguments that they present, is that you see, for example, in the West, you see people like Sam Harris. He is one of the people called the four horsemen of new atheism. Right? Sam Harris rejects all forms of religiosity. Right?
He should have changed his name, Samuel.
He rejects all forms of religiosity. He believes that religion, organized religion, and religious expression in all its forms is grotesque. Right? In one of his books, he says that the idea of defending Islam, even with your life, is diabolical in nature.
Baphomet worshippers.
Yeah. So, but at the same time, this person who is positioning himself as this great beacon of enlightenment, of liberation from all these medieval chains, when it comes to Zionism and criticism of Israel and the genocide going on, absolutely silent. In fact, if you look him up, you will find that he has been, in the past, he has been confronted about Zionism and about Israel, and he has been an apologist for them, coming up with elaborate excuses, philosophical excuses, which obviously, being an academic,
and an atheist.
And an atheist is something that is his bread and butter. Like most academics around the world, we know how to frame arguments to make them look rational. It is the audience that needs to discern whether this is truly rational or a fallacy. So he has been an apologist for Israel. He has been an apologist for Zionism. While his other stances, his academic stances, dictate that he should be one of the foremost critics of Zionist Judaism, right? Zionist Judaism. But no, that is a red line he will not cross. So this is
Samuel.
Unobjective academia. This is that manipulated academia. This is that interest and lobby-based academia. On the other side, you have right now, during this genocide in Palestine and in Gaza, you have feminist thinkers and writers who are very radical in their stances, who do not have, if you go through their books and their interviews, they don't really display any sympathy for religion and organized religion. They believe these things to be relics of the past. But when it comes to criticizing Israel, one of these people is outspoken in her criticism. Is one of the people who is being boycotted right now in the United States, whose academic career is being targeted, right? So you find that there are currents within modern academia and modern intellectual movements that are completely in the pocket of Zionism, and you have other currents that are not, even though they disagree with our standpoints. So we won't just label them to be Satanists or label them to be enemies of humanity just because of their opinions. No, we'll take their opinions in the academic sense of it, and we'll criticize them, and we'll try to provide constructive criticism, and that is where it stops. So it is a conversation. So having said these disclaimers, we need to go on to why some feminist thinkers believe that men should not transgress upon the arena of women issues. So the first thing that they point out is that women have a particular epistemic privilege when it comes to experiences about themselves and about women's history, because it is a lived experience. So in the tradition of Sayyid Allama Ayatollah Murtaza Mutahari, I like to present these arguments in an objective manner without just going directly to the criticism, right? So in a manner of speaking, this isn't a bad standpoint, right? Women, given their particular history, especially in the West and also globally, are in a unique position to understand the oppression, the cultural oppression and the gender oppression that they have witnessed, right? And men might not be able to relate to that particular circumstance. Men have never having experienced that kind of experience, that kind of oppression, might never be able to understand the depths of that trauma. The same is true for the Palestinians, for example. The Eastern people, Western people might never be able to properly understand what people in the Middle East, in East Asia, in West Asia have gone through under colonialism, under imperialism, under Zionism, right? White Americans might never be totally able to understand what Black African Americans have gone through, right? So to this extent, we understand and we appreciate that yes, women have an epistemic privilege. They have a unique and an epistemic privilege, a unique point of view, a unique perspective that can accurately discern the depths of their own experience. Right? Interestingly, we have a narration about this So a woman comes up to Imam Baqir alayhi salam or Imam Sadiq alayhi salam, I forget one of the two, but one of the Sadiqain alayhi salam. And she has some particular women issue questions that she needs to ask. And these are very private, so they
ask them in private.
She asks them privately, and when she comes out, she's totally astonished and amazed. So the companions, the other people there, they ask her, why are you so astonished and amazed and surprised? And she says that I cannot believe that the answers provided by the Imam are answers provided by a man. How could he know the precise details, the emotional, the intellectual, the biological details,
the very essence
of what I was asking? And this is something. So to this extent, inshallah, we'll discuss this in the future as well. Pure Muhammadan Islam accepts this standpoint, but not in its universality. Right? We say that yes, women have a unique ability to understand their own experiences, just as men have a unique ability to understand their own experiences. Right? But at the same time, this does not lead to a philosophical impossibility of understanding one another's experiences. Here, I guess I'll need to explain just shortly what a philosophical impossibility is versus a social or habitual impossibility. I'll start with the latter. A social or habitual impossibility is something that normally doesn't happen. Right? So for example, in the West, if they talk about the fact that white people normally can't understand what's going on in terms of their own passive racism, this is something that can be removed through a learning process. Right? Or someone who has a habit, for example, of smoking, can remove this habit through a learning process. But normally, if there is no intervention internally or externally, this habit will remain the same. Right? So this is called a habitual impossibility. So sometimes if you're looking at a person and you're looking through how he lives his life and his habits, and you say this person will never be able to be a disciplined worker. When you say never, you're talking about social and habitual impossibility. You're not talking about philosophical impossibility, that somehow existentially this person will never be. No, if he is trained, if he has the willpower, if he applies himself, he can. But normally it doesn't happen. One of the things that is, one of the fallacies that you find often repeated within the Western intellectual tradition and Western philosophy is that social or habitual impossibility, or improbability, as it should be called, is normally presented as philosophical impossibility. So coming back to our own topic. Yes, if men do not change their perspectives, especially in that extremely toxic society that West has historically been, right? If men do not change their perspectives, if they do not open their minds, if they do not get rid of their prejudices, their biases, and what feminists call toxicity, yes, if they do not do this, and if they are not helped from outside by people who can train them to get rid of these biases, then yes, they will not be able to understand a woman's experience.
Or anybody else's.
Or anybody else's experience, right? But this does not mean that they are inherently incapable of doing so. So what does Islam say? And inshallah, in our later episodes, we'll talk about how Imam Sayyid Ali Khamenei speaks of this issue. Islam says that the gap between a unique subjective experience can be filled by religious teachings and divine insight, as well as divinely inspired tutelage. Right? So if you have the right leaders who are the embodiments of divine teachings, you have divine teachings themselves, which are totally unbiased, totally unprejudiced, because they are from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, who does not take sides, who is the source of all existence. And then you have divine insight created by acting upon these divine teachings.
Laws and teachings.
That causes this inner purification, causes you to become a personality that is open to pure thought, open to empathy, open to sympathy, open to taking things in their objective perspective. Then you will be able to understand the experience of others. And this is why the followers of pure Muhammadan Islam, alhamdulillah, around the world, are so ready to empathize with the African Americans, with the colonized Africans, with all the oppressed peoples in the world. And today, you find them at the forefront of empathizing and sympathizing with the people of Palestine as the most oppressed people on earth right now. Right? So this is the consequence of those divine teachings. Right? So this is the first argument that they present. Epistemic privilege, which leads, they claim, to epistemic authority, that only we should speak. We, in our answer to this, say that no, this isn't what's going on. Men, provided that they have these conditions, are able to speak here as well. The other point that they present, which kind of comes out of this first point, is that masculinity has historically been dominating the public discourse. So you've had enough time to speak, now let us speak, right? And you find this in decolonial movements, intellectual movements as well. So the Africans would say that it's enough, Anglo-Saxon people, shut up now, let us speak. Let us tell you what Africa is, for example. Or people from the East addressing the Orientalist point of view. And again, you see that
waiting for the children to say, okay, adults, you shut up now, it's our turn to speak.
Exactly, that is something that can also happen as well. So, but you see that in all of these points, as I mentioned earlier, there is a glimmer of truth. It's only when that piece of truth is expanded to become a universal principle with no exceptions. That is where things go wrong.
Sure.
Right?
Yeah.
So in terms of the first point that we mentioned, a radical, hardcore feminist would say that even Rasulullah, even Jesus Christ,
does not
have the authority to speak on women's issues. Right? Our response would be that no, given that divine background, given that divine link, that divinely pure personality, that divinely pure and unbiased intellect, they can speak not only about women's issues, but someone of this purity is in a better status to speak about men's issues and women's issues than the men and women themselves, because each is trapped, according to your own epistemological ideology, each is trapped in their own biases.
Yeah, and this pure individual.
What their own philosophers call this hermeneutic trap. They're stuck within their own horizons of thought. But someone who is linked to divinity can speak as an outsider, unbiased, not marred by these prejudices, right? The second point was that historically they have dominated the space, and now it's our turn to speak, and they should be listening. Again, if it's just that, and if it's not an over-radicalization of this standpoint, then Islam is open, right? Right from the beginning. If you talk about pure Muhammadan Islam, you have the example of Lady Khadija, salamullah alayha. You have the example of Lady Fatima, salamullah alayha. If you take a broader circle of all Muslims around the world, you have other leading women figures as well, right in the beginning of history, right? If you talk about the Quran presents Lady Asiya and Lady Maryam as examples for all of mankind, especially the women, right? So we have always, in fact, some of the Orientalist writers have actually written this, that Rasulullah was the first feminist in history, quote unquote. Obviously, they're looking from their own perspective, right? But that is how much respect that Islam gives to the feminine gender and to their participation in society, in intellectual debates, in all forms of social activity, that someone looking from a feminist perspective sometimes would label the Prophet of Islam sallallahu alaihi wasallam as a feminist as well, right? So that kind of proves our point. But the other thing that we wanted to mention here is that if you're talking about safe spaces for women to speak without being interjected by men and their dominance in public discourse, then look at the social model of Islam. Look at the social model of the Islamic Republic. Why do we say that women should have their own universities? Why do we say that women should have their own Hawzatul Ilmiya, grand seminaries, right? Why do we say that women should have ample space within society in which they have no interference by strange men trying to dictate and manipulate them? So Islam already is giving you the solution.
It's the West that has failed.
It is the West and the historical baggage of the West that has created a skewed opinion even in the minds of the women trying to find solutions to that disgusting past that they've had, right? But within Islamic society, you have, like, if you just start listing some of the luminaries within Islamic society, you have so many women. Of course, in Islamic spirituality. You have leading sages who were women, right? So this is something that is particular to the West. It isn't something, and even Imam Khamenei points this out, and inshallah we'll talk about this later as well in other episodes. He says that even if such toxicity has come into Eastern societies, it has normally, especially Muslim societies, it has normally been the trickle-down effect of Western cultural hegemony. Our own traditional values were not of this sort.
Yeah, sure.
If anything, we were matriarchal. We were like some of these societies in the world who have this extremely, almost a grandiose importance for the status of women in society. The third point is that if they say that if men come into this discussion, and because of their bad experience in the past, centuries upon centuries, they say that men will co-opt and they will distort and hijack the discussion and bring it back again to a kind of social and cultural slavery of women. Again, our response is very simple. What we are proposing is that men be purified. What Islam is a holistic project. When men are purified, and the people who are allowed to speak are the people of ilm, of knowledge, scholars. If you look through our books, the first condition of a faqih, who is an expert in Islamic sciences, right, is adala, is justice, right? So he needs to be a person who puts aside his prejudices, his biases, who has purified himself so much that he doesn't even need to put aside anything. The baggage is no longer there. Right?
And this is,
there has been a cleansing over years and years and years of self-cleansing and self-purification. Right?
This is now a divine human being that is talking about another human being.
Exactly, right? So this is one point. When we in Islam say that men should be allowed to speak about women's issues as well, right? And they, in fact, people who are the highest experts in Islamic sciences have this privilege and authority to speak. What are we talking about? We're not talking about the toxic men of the West. We're not talking about the wolves of the West, the wolves of Wall Street and the wolves.
They shouldn't be talking about anything.
They shouldn't be talking about anything, right? And at the same time, this is one aspect of our critique, and the other critique is this: even women can be manipulated, right? So you can have women who are on the payrolls or on the agenda of those undercurrents within society.
Yes, it's like you call them the wolves among wolves.
Right? Look at the administrations in the UK and the US. Don't you have women there? Are these truly women that you would want to idealize? Women who can sit there and say that yes, killing 1 million people in Iraq is justified? Would the wife of Netanyahu be an example? This genocidal woman of a genocidal husband, would she be an apt example for unprejudiced perspective towards women in the world? Would the women dancing around on the IDF, which should be called the IOF or the IGF, the Israeli genocidal forces, with the soldiers, the female soldiers of them dancing around on social media, almost naked and nude, trying to pink wash the genocide, are they an apt example?
Many times these so-called feminists of the West actually represent and manifest the male toxicity that they're trying to, I don't know, put
but
down.
we won't want to go into that right now, because
we
inshallah will be discussing this independently, right? So yes, even women can be agents of co-opting and distorting and manipulating the debate. So this isn't male specific. And especially the solution that Islam presented, which is adala, which is intellectual justice, leading from spiritual cleansing, right? And the last point that I'd like to mention here is the power dynamics that they talk about. So they say that if men are allowed in, and this is similar to the last point, they say that they would reinforce patriarchal patterns, they would mansplain everything, right? Again, the same answer as the answer above, right? You can have women who are actually agents of that patriarchal society.
Doing the mansplaining.
Right? Just because you're biologically a woman, which itself is a debate, and inshallah we'll get to that later on, just because you're biologically a woman doesn't make you immune to being subservient to a patriarchal, toxic society controlled by world Zionism. And you see this every day in the West.
Yeah, sure.
Right? You see this every day in the West. Just look at that actress that I won't name, I won't blemish my tongue by, the Israeli actress who has the audacity of standing with the Israeli government, right? And on the other hand, you have other actresses in Hollywood who are standing with the Palestinian people. So this shows that just being a woman doesn't naturally make you an angel. You can be a devil or you can be an angel. So these are basically, and the last point that they kind of highlight is that women need their own safe spaces, and we've already talked about that, that in the Islamic model, women are not only allowed safe spaces, but the Islamic government is responsible to create these spaces. And it is their duty in Islam to create these spaces in which women can express their own identities, their own emotions, their own emotional depth, without the interference or the constant manipulation of male influences.
Negative male influences.
Negative male influences.
Yeah, Jazakallah. I mean, I want to give you, 2-3 minutes to kind of conclude that at the end of the day, because we gave a lot of information and, but at the end of the day, what is this conclusion that we have come up with when it comes to that, yes, men can speak for the matters related to women?
So as a conclusion, as a summary of everything we've talked about, first of all, we talked about how we will try to be very objective and we will try to see through the fog of war and try to pick those gems of truth that feminism is articulating even within Western academia. Our analysis will not be an analysis of tribalistic bias, that we're going to just paint everything with black and say everything's wrong. No, that is not what we're going to be doing. Number two, at the same time, we will not be naive, and we will be aware that many points made by feminism in the West are points influenced, almost unconsciously or subconsciously influenced by masculine toxicity that is prevalent in the West. So they are still unable to escape that vicious circle. And then we talked about,
well, don't say it. What I want to know, for example, is then what gives the right to a man to talk about women's issues?
Not all men have the right to talk about women's issues, and not all women have the right to talk about women's issues. Islam says that the expert, and not just the academic expert, but the spiritual expert, someone who is pure and clean of biases, and at the same time has good intentions, good divine intentions, right, which is dictated by divine teachings, and at the same time has the academic authority and the academic know-how of speaking about a subject and analyzing the subject. This person, be it a woman or a man, should be allowed and encouraged and given the space to express his or her opinions on those topics.
Jazakallah. Thank you so much, Sayyid Agha Ali Raza. Inshallah, it should be a very interesting series and hopefully clear up, like you said, a lot of the fog of war and misconceptions and misguidance that is going out there, inshallah. So we hope to have you on another talk show again in the series. May Allah bless you. And inshallah, well, we hope to see you on another one. Thank you so much, Jazakallah. Dear viewers, that's all from us for now. Inshallah, please join us on the rest of the series where we are talking about the overall issues related to the very essence of women and women's identity, inshallah. That's all from us for now. Fi amanillah, and assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.